Hey everyone, I'm Jp Szafron. This is Kitco News. Remember to subscribe for the latest insights. Now today we're exploring a significant shift in U.S. financial policy, the readoption of gold and silver as legal tender. Now this initiative isn't just about diversifying investments, it's deeply rooted in the U.S. Constitution, which originally defined money specifically as gold and silver coins. Now states across the nation are now stepping up from eliminating taxes on these precious metals to reinforcing their use in daily transactions, directly challenging the dominance of paper currency and the Federal Reserve's control over our economic stability. Now, joining us to discuss this constitutional revival and its implications for inflation and your finances, of course, is Jp Cortez. He's the executive director of Sound Money Defense League, a bipartisan organization dedicated to promoting sound money principles. JP, welcome to the show.
Hey, Jeremy. Thank you so much for having me on. It's good to be here.
Okay, JP, let's start with the basics here. Explain to our audience why stable, sound money is critical for economic stability and how federal policies and Federal Reserve actions impact this stability.
Sure, of course. So the sound money has two pretty simple value propositions. The first is that sound money provides people the chance to be able to save and plan in a currency that they know will hold value over the long term. And that's crucially important. The building of infrastructure and to be able to plan decades into the future and make plans to that spur and develop business development. All of that is based and rooted in having a sound currency. So being able to grow as a society comes from having a stable money. The second tenet to sound money, as the second part of the value proposition, is its ability to constrain a government that would otherwise spend or grow recklessly, right? Mm-hmm. In America's case, the central banks, the Federal Reserve's ability to print money oftentimes gets used for things that people personally probably wouldn't pay for and in many cases wouldn't support. These are wasteful domestic projects. These are, in many cases, wars of choice all around the world. So sound money constrains a government that would otherwise do bad things with the power afforded to the printer of money. So like you were saying, right, the Federal Reserve has so much power and so much influence over money. And the issue is that the stewards of America's money have been doing a very poor job of that, at least since 1971, when Nixon officially closed the gold window, cutting the last tie to the gold standard. Before that, 1933, the establishment of the income tax, and then the establishment of the Federal Reserve in 1913. So for over 100 years now, America has been systematically destroying its money, replacing the gold standard with a debt standard. And that, unsurprisingly, has caused an explosion of government spending, an explosion of government deficits. And we're seeing the results of that now, right? People are having a hard time affording housing and food and medicine. And that's not an act of God. Inflation is a policy choice. And to the extent that it's a policy choice, it can be changed. And on the state level, it can be mitigated.
Right. JP, critics argue that focusing too much on sound money could lead to restrictive monetary policies that might hinder economic growth. How do you respond to concerns that too rigid of an approach might stifle economic flexibility here?
I am open to the idea that the financial machinations that exist today wouldn't be available to us in the case of a gold standard. You wouldn't be able to QE your way into spurring consumption or spending. That is true. So there are trade-offs, to be sure, between a system, the fiat system like the one that exists today, and a gold standard rooted in a hard currency. But I would say that to me, the trade-off is clear, right? The idea that private currencies can't compete is a lie. There's a lot of history and scholarship on that front. And the idea that the Federal Reserve System, since its creation in 1913, has been a boon to America as far as being able to defend against or prevent financial crises, I think is an obvious lie, right? The 1913 was the establishment of the Federal Reserve. It's not a coincidence that 15, 16 years later, the world saw the greatest depression it had ever seen. and so on and so forth. We've seen episodes of stagflation and recessions and depressions since then. So the idea that the Federal Reserve somehow protects or insulates the financial system better than a gold standard would, I think doesn't hold water. And that is even before you get into the considerations about how a gold standard would constrain a government from spending and funding and fighting in wars all across the country in places many of us never heard of. Right. Both financially and ethically, morally, constitutionally, the gold standard, I think, is a hands down preferable system of money to what we have now, which is a PhD debt standard.
Okay, so let's break this down a little bit. I mean, you've mentioned that a lot of the responsibility for our current financial instability lies with the Fed, the federal actions, obviously. Yet states are taking significant steps to reintroduce gold and silver as legal tender. So what can states realistically achieve in this area without federal cooperation?
Mm-hmm. It's a great question. And I think until recently, it's a question of a lot of states never really considered. But the truth is, more than any other reason, the reason that gold and silver today are not currently workable as money is because of the state and federal taxes that are levied against them. In some states here in the United States, when you go into a store to buy precious metals, whether coin, bar, or round, whether minted in the US or privately minted, you're going to get hit with a sales tax. There are still 5 states in the country here in the United States that will charge you for exchanging one form of money for another. And they're charging the sales tax on that exchange. In many states, you're charged a capital gains tax when you sell the metal, if you enjoy a gain. And that is also true on the federal level. So in some cases, gold and silver are triple taxed here in the United States, depending on what jurisdiction you're in. And that friction is what keeps gold and silver from being used as money. It's not because gold and silver aren't money. It's not that the gold standard died. It was killed. It was shackled by disincentives and regulations that make it unworkable as money. So to that end, states are proactively and actively passing legislation to end a lot of these taxes, because that's in our estimation the biggest impediment to use as money for gold and silver. 45 states now have ended this tax on gold and silver purchases, the sales tax. 13 states have ended the capital gains tax. So when you sell, if you enjoy a gain, you would not be taxed on that gain. And then it's not just that. States are also being proactive about reincorporating sound money, gold and silver, into their own financial plans. States are actively finding ways to invest in physical gold and silver. We're passing legislation to empower state treasurers to invest in physical gold and silver stored within the state or in contiguous states if they choose. And so that's it's a big part of what we're doing here. It's not just taxes, though taxes are a big part of right. the friction that exists. States themselves, individuals in these states, and then even on the federal level, legislation is being introduced to remonetize gold and silver.
Okay, let's before we get into the state taxes, which I want to get into the legislation a little bit and really unpack it, but given the vast power of the Fed, the Federal Reserve, and obviously the central banking system, how effective can state level initiatives like this truly be in influencing national monetary policy? Is it working?
I think we're seeing it working right now. And I'm happy to say that. So, for example, we have a great example here just recently. In the last 2 weeks, both the state of Nebraska and the state of Alabama passed legislation exempting capital gains from gold and silver on the state level. And that is part of a movement. Other states have recently done that same thing. And in response to that, or at least on the heels of that, Congressman Alex Mooney, U.S. Representative from West Virginia, recently reintroduced legislation to end this tax. It ends all federal income taxation on gold and silver coins and bullion in the entire country. So this is it's a movement that definitely started on the state level, but we're seeing it percolate all the way up to the federal level. And importantly, we're seeing it percolate down to individuals. These laws that we're passing, the removal of the disincentives, is what allows people to readopt a personal gold standard. And it also, I think, breeds or incentivizes or encourages innovation in money. right? And we're seeing that. We're seeing fractional gold, for example, appear in a way that historically hasn't been seen before. We're seeing digital gold and crypto. We're seeing a revolution in money. And by removing all of the briar and the thistle that keeps people from using gold and silver as money, collateral lending being another great example of a monetary innovation. For example, Money Metals Collateral Group, the Money Metals Exchange is the Sound Money Defense League is a project of Money Metals Exchange, and they, for example, are offering this collateral lending group where you can tap into the equity of your metals without having to sell it. So the removal of all of the disincentives and all of the bureaucracy and all of the impediments that stand in the way of people using gold and silver as money, we're going state to state removing those. And I think I'm very excited and I'm very bullish because I'm seeing it work. This is a bona fide win for lovers of liberty and lovers of gold and silver that on the state level, on the federal level, gold and silver are making a real comeback here in 2024.
Absolutely. Huge headlines. And I mean, as you mentioned, with states like Alabama and Nebraska passing laws to remove capital gain taxes on precious metals. But I'm curious, how do you foresee this affecting everyday financial transactions in the broader U.S. economy here?
Well, I think so long as the federal tax still exists, that's going to be the biggest impediment. So states can do their part, and they have been, and they will continue to do so. But ultimately, the biggest tax issue is going to be the tax on the federal level. So removing that would be the biggest priority one. Another thing I think that is something gold and silver innovators are going to have to face is Gresham's law, right? Even if you could use gold and silver as money, would you necessarily want to? So long as people are willing to accept a devaluing US dollar or US Federal Reserve note, why would I spend my actual gold, my good money, to pay debts when I can use this other dying money to do it? So I think that's something that the entrepreneurs that are in this space that are devoting a lot of brainpower and money to innovations in money are going to have to contend with. But I think that sort of innovation is what we want and need, and those questions have to be answered by the people that are creating money. And how can money best be used? What does that look like on a personal level? It obviously has to be convenient. It has to be accessible and easy for many people. And I think the market ultimately is going to decide which one of these structures, which one of these coins, which one of these digital platforms, or which one of these physical brands ultimately will win out. And the market will decide that the same way the market decided gold and silver are the best money.
Right. JP, some economists worry that reintroducing gold and silver as money could lead to increased market volatility and a bifurcated currency system. How do you address those concerns about, potential financial instability here?
I think it makes a lot of sense for the Federal Reserve to be scared. Right. I think that no matter what, they're always going to have something to come back with. And their cause for concern is legitimate. The power to print and control money is a grand and awesome power. And the U.S. government has had a monopoly on that power since 1913, at least. So I think the powers that be will always have a reason as to why gold and silver shouldn't be money, or why technocrats should be the ones running regressions to determine what the optimal interest rate is, or what the optimal price of money is. In the case of competing monies, I think that's ultimately how we decide or determine, how the market determines what makes the best money. To the extent that reintroducing gold and silver back into the economy introduces competition to the US dollar, I say that's a good thing, and it should be encouraged. Because even if the dollar does end up winning, some competition might encourage dollar managers to be better stewards of that dollar, to not use it to harm their enemies and to help their friends, to not weaponize it as a political cudgel, because that's what the dollar has been used for many decades. And we're seeing the effects of that in very real ways right now. We're seeing BRICS countries talking about establishing currencies in gold and silver. We're seeing the U.S. choosing to seize Russian assets. And so countries all over the world decide or are starting to think to themselves out loud, hey, maybe the U.S. dollar as a world reserve currency is a little biased towards the U.S., and maybe there should be something a little more impartial. The weaponization of the dollar has been the primary cause of its decline. And so gold and silver being reintroduced and hopefully reintroducing some fiscal financial discipline would be a good thing.
Yeah, well said. Okay, as you mentioned, we've seen quite the year for gold. Obviously, we had these all-time highs, and we've seen a trend where consumers are increasingly purchasing gold from retailers like Costco and even considering foreign minted coins like the Canadian maples. So how does the current legislation address or fail to address these non-traditional and foreign products?
In most cases, in the legislation that we passed regarding the sales tax, bills like that are written in to define it. The bill exempts gold, silver, in many cases, platinum and palladium as well, coins, bars, and rounds. The bills then go to define what that means. So typically, the bills will define this as the precious metals that are minted, refined, and valued primarily by their value as precious metals, not by their value as a collectible or for any rarity purposes. So in the case of Costco or even other dealers, both online and in store, these sales tax exemptions that we're passing would cover almost everything, whether it's minted privately or minted by a state government, whether it's 3 nines or 4 nines, whether it's junk silver, in many cases, the 40% stuff, the 90% stuff. The legislation that we're passing includes all of this, because the idea is, especially in the case of junk silver is an obvious example where the purity is very low, but these are items that are very workable as money, as small barter pieces, dimes, quarters. So it's imperative, maybe even more so than the larger, for example, 1 ounce gold bar, which has less function as a money, a $2,400 bill is less usable than a nickel or so. Right. So it's very important that all of those items be exempt from the sales tax, and to not exclude any investor or any saver for choosing to save in Philharmonics versus Maple Leafs versus Kangaroos versus a privately minted round. So the bills make sure to capture all of that.
Good. No, that's really good to hear, and I'm sure our audience will be happy to hear that too. Now, looking ahead, how do you envision the role of gold and silver evolving in the U.S. monetary system? I mean, are there plans or even discussions at the federal level that could further support this or maybe hinder it?
So the federal bill that was just reintroduced, I think, is a great example of gaining traction, sound money gaining traction on the federal level. This is also just one of several efforts that have appeared on the federal level over the last couple of years, many of which introduced by Congressman Alex Mooney. These are bills that would reestablish a gold standard. These are bills that call for a full accounting of all U.S. gold holdings, any encumbrances that might be placed upon them, any swaps or leases or derivatives, any sort of anything that's been placed on America's gold. This would call for a full accounting of all of that. So on the federal level, there has been talk over the years, and I think this started back Ron Paul before Congressman Mooney. I don't expect, I'm sad to say, I don't necessarily expect the Federal Reserve to readopt the gold standard tomorrow. Like we were saying earlier, the power to print money is an extreme and great power, and I don't think that they would easily give up that power. But I think, and there is a reality to the federal level being very difficult to pass legislation. It's admittedly closer to a gridlock on the federal level. And that makes it hard to have hearings or to pass legislations. But as an educational tool and as a tool that gets people talking, I think that serves a huge purpose. And that ultimately bolsters arguments that we're making in the state level. So we're not necessarily asking politicians to come out and do something crazy. This is something that many states around the country have adopted, and something that's being done on the federal level. And I think ultimately the approval, though gold and silver do not need approval from the government to be money, the approval of gold and silver and the treatment of gold and silver as money, I think psychologically helps a lot of people reestablish or reaffirm that gold and silver are indeed money, right? The idea of gold and silver as money, at least in the Western world, has sort of completely escaped the American zeitgeist. And so to reintroduce some of those ideas, I think is a huge help to what we're doing here. And ultimately, I think the individuals in the state, the grassroots participation, is what gets these state projects across the finish line. So I think it all perpetuates itself. It all is better and good for the promotion of sound money on an individual and on a national level.
Okay, so JP, before I let you go, because we're almost out of time here, talk to me a little bit about what's next for you. I mean, what's next on the fight here? You've already passed this in a couple of states. What's happening next?
Well, Jeremy, like I said, we've got 5 states left in the country that still charge sales tax. Those states are Hawaii, New Mexico, New Jersey, Vermont, and Maine. And those states are at the top of our list. Those states have targets on them. Of those 5 states, we've got 4 of those states that have already actively introduced legislation to end this tax. So we're making a lot of progress. The capital gains issue on the state level is something that's picked up a lot of speed now that the sales tax issue has almost been completely done away with. So that is picking up a lot of momentum. States all over the country are introducing that. This year we had, I think, 26 or 27 states that were considering almost more than 60 pieces of legislation that are all pro sound money legislation. In Utah earlier this year, we passed legislation that empowers the state treasurer to invest in physical gold. So this year, for the last 4 or 5 years, I've been happy to say, at the end of the last 4 or 5 years, I've said each time, wow, this is as successful a sound money year as state legislatures have ever seen. Mm-hmm. And that started when we passed our first bill. And then a few more states introduced, and then a few more states passed. And each year, it's a cumulative thing. And we're seeing more and more states do this. This year, we're already up to 5 states that have passed bills on this. There are several pieces of legislation across the country that are still actively being considered in Alaska and New Jersey. So I'm very bullish on gold and silver as sound money. I'm very bullish on the American readoption, maybe not on the federal level, but on a personal and individual level. And I'm bullish because I'm seeing it happen.
Nicely said. Jp Cortez, Executive Director of the Sound Money Defense League, joining us today to provide his insight. Hey, JP, thanks for this. We'll get you on again so you can give our audience a little bit of a lay of the land and an update on these policies in the future. Thank you.
Looking forward to it. Thank you, Jeremy.
Thanks so much. I'm Jeremy Szafron for all of us here at Kitco News. Thank you for tuning in. We got lots of great content coming your way, so feel free to comment on the videos that you'd like to see and what you'd like to hear from our show. We'll see you next time.